One CEO called a single mother employee into his office. She feared being fired, but discovered that he was in love and had an unexpected proposal. A love story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment where you are watching from. The central air conditioning of Nexus Tech hummed softly through the marble corridors, blending with the subtle aroma of lavender emanating from strategically placed automatic diffusers every 15 meters. Sarah Johnson walked with calculated steps down the main corridor, her low heels echoing a nervous rhythm against the polished floor that reflected the recessed LED lights in the ceiling. At 32, she carried the weight of a responsibility that went far beyond her role as a junior financial analyst. "Sarah, I need to talk to you, now." The deep voice of CEO Edward Smith cut through the usual office murmur like a sharp blade. She felt her blood run cold. Automatically, her right hand rose to her lower lip, a nervous habit she had developed since her teenage years, always betraying her in moments of extreme tension. The small scar on her left eyebrow, a reminder of a bicycle fall at 8, twitched slightly as she tried to decipher the expression on Edward's face. The man who controlled the fate of over 300 employees in that glass and steel building in the heart of New York City. "Of course, Mr. Smith. Is there a problem with the third quarter reports?" Sarah asked, adjusting the navy blazer she had bought on sale at Macy's 3 years ago. It was her most formal piece of clothing, reserved for special occasions and important meetings. Today, apparently, would be both. Edward studied her for a moment that felt like an eternity. At 45, he had a reputation for being a ruthless businessman, known in the market for quick decisions and strategy changes that left even the most experienced executives dizzy. His tempered glass desk occupied the center of a room that resembled an observatory, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the metropolis stretching to the Appalachian Mountains, shrouded in the typical fog of New York mornings. "Actually, Sarah, I want to talk about your future here at the company." He paused, studying her reactions. "In the past 8 months, I have observed your dedication. You always arrive 15 minutes before the workday starts, stay later when necessary, and your analyses have a precision that impresses even the most experienced directors." Sarah felt her heart race, but tried to maintain her composure. During those 8 months at Nexus Tech, she had worked hard to prove her worth. She woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare Sophia, her 7-year-old daughter, for school, dropped her off at Mrs. Thompson's house, a retired lady who had become a second grandmother to the girl, and faced an hour and a half of public transport to reach the office on Wall Street. "Mr. Smith, I appreciate the recognition. This job means a lot to me and my daughter." Her voice came out more choked than she would have liked, laden with a vulnerability she rarely allowed others to see. Edward stood up and walked to the window, observing the frenetic movement of the city below. "Sarah, do you have family here in New York? Parents, grandparents?" The question caught her off guard. "My mother passed away when Sophia was born, and my father, well, he is not part of our lives. My grandmother Mary disappeared when I was 15. The police never managed to find her." The old pain tightened her chest again. Grandma Dora, as she called her, had been her only stable family reference. What an interesting name. Mary is a traditional English name. Edward turned to her, and Sarah noticed something different in his eyes, an intensity that went beyond professional interest. "Sarah, I need you to know that our company has a rich history. Nexus Tech was founded in 1952 by a Portuguese immigrant named Anthony Smith. He arrived in America with just a leather suitcase and dreams of building a tech empire." Sarah furrowed her brow. "Smith is my family surname, but it must be a coincidence. It's one of the most common surnames in America. Perhaps it is not as common as you think." Edward returned to his chair and opened a drawer of his desk. "In recent months, while you were working on the old financial files, a human resources team made some interesting discoveries during the digitization of historical company documents." He pulled out a time-worn folder and placed it on the desk. "Sarah, I believe you are not here by chance. There are some things about your family, about your grandmother, that you might want to know. Sarah's blood seemed to stop circulating. Her hands trembled slightly, that characteristic that always betrayed her in moments of extreme tension. What? What do you mean? I mean that perhaps your grandmother did not disappear. Perhaps she had her reasons for distancing herself, and maybe she was protecting something, or someone. The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of the air conditioning and the muffled roar of traffic 30 floors below. Sarah felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her feet. For 17 years, she had wondered what had happened to the woman who raised her, who taught her how to make chocolate truffles on the wood-burning stove of their simple home in Newark, who sang traditional English nursery rhymes while combing her curly hair. Mr. Smith, I don't understand. What does my grandmother have to do with this company? Edward opened the folder and pulled out a black and white photograph. The image showed a middle-aged man next to a young woman, both in front of a building that Sarah recognized as a much older version of the building where they now worked. This is Anthony Smith, the founder of the company. And this, he pointed to the woman in the photo, is Mary Smith, your grandmother Sarah, and if my records are correct, that makes you much more than just an employee of this company. Sarah took the photograph with trembling hands. The woman's face was unmistakably that of her grandmother, just decades younger. The same expressive eyes, the same warm smile she held in her memory. This is impossible, she whispered, more to herself than to Edward. My grandmother worked as a seamstress. She lived in a simple house, never mentioned anything about a company, about being married to a businessman. Sometimes the people we love keep secrets to protect us. Sarah, and I believe your grandmother had her reasons. Edward leaned back in his chair, observing the conflicting emotions that passed over her face. The question now is, are you ready to discover the truth about your family? Because once we open that door, there's no turning back. Sarah looked again at the photograph, then at Edward, then at the city view through the window. Down below, 8 million people lived their lives, each carrying their own stories, their own secrets. And there she was, discovering that perhaps her own story was very different from what she had always believed. I need to know, she finally said, her voice gaining a strength she didn't know she possessed. For Sophia, for myself, for my grandmother, I need to know the truth. Edward smiled for the first time since he had called her into the office. Then Sarah Smith, welcome to the true story of your family. The New York afternoon began to give way to twilight as Sarah left Edward's office, carrying with her the folder of documents that promised to rewrite her entire personal history. Her legs trembled as she walked through the hallways that now seemed different, no longer the intimidating marble paths of a company where she was just another employee, but the corridors of a family legacy she had been completely unaware of. Sarah, wait! The feminine voice, with a subtle French accent, made her stop near the elevators. It was Gabrielle Dubois, Edward's personal assistant, an elegant woman in her 40s, always impeccably dressed in Chanel suits and carrying a Hermès bag that Sarah knew cost more than her 6-month salary. Hi, Gabrielle. Sorry, I'm a bit distracted today. Sarah tried to smile, but she knew her expression betrayed the whirlwind of emotions she felt. Gabrielle approached, her Louboutin heels making a rhythmic sound against the marble. Can I ask, did Edward talk to you about the company's history? About your family? The direct question caught Sarah off guard. How did you know? Dear, I've been working for Edward for 5 years. I know when he's about to reveal important secrets. Gabrielle looked around, ensuring they were alone. But there are things he doesn't know, things I perhaps should have told you before. Sarah felt her stomach churn. What kind of things? Shall we grab a coffee? There's a French cafe on 5th Avenue, just 10 minutes from here. We need to talk away from the company's ears. 30 minutes later, the two women were sitting at a discreet table in the French cafe, surrounded by the aroma of fresh croissants and espresso. Gabrielle absent-mindedly stirred sugar into her porcelain cup, clearly organizing her thoughts. Sarah, I need to start by properly introducing myself. She took a deep breath. My full name is Gabrielle Dubois Smith. Smith is not just your last name, it's also mine. Sarah nearly dropped her cup. What? We are distant cousins. My grandmother, Marguerite Smith, was the sister of your great-grandfather Anthony. She moved to France in the 1930s, married a Frenchman, and never returned to Brazil. But she always kept in touch through letters with the family that stayed here. Sarah's head was spinning. In less than 6 hours, she had discovered that her humble grandmother was the widow of a prosperous businessman, and now her elegant co-worker was her cousin. Gabrielle, why didn't you ever tell me this? We've worked on the same floor for 8 months, because I wasn't sure you were really who I thought you were. Until today. Gabrielle pulled out a state-of-the-art smartphone from her bag and showed a photo. This photo came to me through genealogical research I've been doing for years. Do you recognize anyone? The image showed 3 women on a beach. Sarah immediately recognized her grandmother, younger, next to 2 other women she didn't know. The woman in the middle is my grandmother, Marguerite. The one on the right is your grandmother, Mary. And this, Gabrielle pointed to the 3rd woman, is Mrs. Thompson, who worked as a secretary in your great-grandfather's company. Sarah furrowed her brow. Mrs. Thompson, that name sounds familiar. It should. She has been working at the reception of Tech Innovations for over 20 years. Mrs. Thompson, the lady who always offers honey candies and speaks with a southern accent. The revelation hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. Mrs. Thompson, the kind woman who always asked about Sophia, who held her umbrella when it rained. Who knew the names of all the employees and their families? Did she know her grandmother? Does that mean that several people in the company know more about your family than you did until today? Gabrielle took a sip of her coffee. Sarah, your grandmother didn't disappear by chance. She left clues, created a protective network around you, even without you knowing. Sarah felt as if she were living in a surreal movie. But why? Why all this mystery? Because there was a lot of money involved. And when there's a lot of money, there are always people willing to do anything to get it. Gabrielle lowered her voice. Your great-grandfather Anthony didn't just leave a company, Sarah. He left a considerable fortune, properties, investments. And from what I've been able to discover, your grandmother was the only legitimate heir. Was. Until you were born. Now She is the legitimate heir. Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling overwhelmed. Gabrielle, I don't understand any of this. I'm just a single mother trying to support my daughter. I work as a junior financial analyst, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Newark. How can I be the heir to a fortune? Because blood is blood, dear. And your grandmother spent 17 years paving the way for this moment. Gabrielle leaned forward. Sarah, do you really believe you got that job at Tech Innovations just by merit? The question left her speechless. Sarah had always prided herself on landing the job on her own merit, despite fierce competition and not having a degree from a prestigious university. Edward didn't hire you by chance. He received guidance. Guidance from whom? From someone who never stopped looking after you, even from a distance. Gabrielle hesitated. Sarah, there's something else I need to tell you, but promise me you won't freak out. Sarah laughed nervously. After everything I've heard today, I doubt anything else could shock me. Your grandmother is alive. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear her own heart pounding, could feel the blood rushing in her temples. Outside the cafe, life went on as usual. Cars passed, people hurried by. The city breathed its frantic rhythm. But in that small space filled with French sweets, Sarah's world had completely stopped. That's impossible, she finally whispered. No, Sarah, unlikely perhaps, but not impossible. Gabrielle pulled another envelope from her bag. This letter arrived for me 3 months ago. It's from your grandmother. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably familiar. The same careful script that wrote notes in her school lunchbox, that jotted down recipes in an old floral-covered notebook. My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this letter, it means the time has come for you to know the truth. Forgive a grandmother for lying all these years, but it was the only way to protect you. The money your great-grandfather left always attracted dangerous people. I had to disappear so you could grow up safely. Now you are a strong woman, mother to a beautiful girl, and you are ready to receive what has always been rightfully yours. Trust Gabriel, trust Edward, trust Mrs. Thompson. They are your allies. Your path will not be easy, my little granddaughter. There will be people who will try to stop you, who will question your legitimacy, who will do everything to take what is yours. But you have the strength of the Smiths running through your veins. I will always be watching over you, even if you cannot see me. With all my love, Grandma Dora. Sarah finished the letter with tears streaming down her face. 17 years of longing, of unanswered questions, of nights spent crying for not having a family, of silent Christmases when Sophia asked why they didn't have grandparents like other kids. "Where is she?" Sarah asked, her voice choked. "That, dear, is something you will have to discover. But I can assure you that every step you take from now on, she will be watching." Gabrielle reached out and squeezed Sarah's hand. "Welcome to the family, cousin. Now let's find out together just how big the inheritance your grandmother kept for you really is." Outside the cafe, the city lights began to flicker on, creating a golden mosaic stretching to the horizon. Sarah looked at the urban landscape and, for the first time in a long time, felt that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change forever. The clock read 7:30 in the morning when Sarah arrived at Tech Innovations the following Monday. The weekend had been an emotional roller coaster. She had spent hours explaining to Sophia why Mommy was crying and laughing at the same time, trying to process all the revelations without overwhelming the 7-year-old with details about mysterious grandmothers and unexpected inheritances. "Good morning, my dear." Mrs. Thompson's warm voice echoed through the reception as Sarah walked through the main entrance. The woman, about 65 years old, with grey hair always neatly tied up in a bun and a smile that radiated genuine kindness, held a small glass bowl filled with handmade honey candies that she brought every week from her hometown in Minas Gerais. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson." Sarah approached the reception, looking at the lady with new eyes. How had she not noticed before the resemblance between Mrs. Thompson's delicate features and those of her grandmother? Can I talk to you when you have a moment?" Mrs. Thompson's brown eyes lit up, but Sarah sensed something deeper there, a mix of relief and expectation, as if she had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. "Of course, dear. How about during lunch? I know a lovely diner nearby that serves a sweetbread, just like what your Grandma Dora used to make." Sarah's heart raced. Mrs. Thompson had mentioned her grandmother so naturally, as if it were something she had always known. Did you know my grandmother?" Mrs. Thompson looked around the empty reception. The other employees had not yet arrived, and leaned slightly forward. "My dear, Maria Dolores and I were friends for over 40 years. I promised her I would look after you, even from afar. And I have kept that promise every day." Sarah's legs weakened. She leaned against the reception desk, trying to absorb yet another revelation in her already overloaded reality. "Mrs. Thompson, please tell me everything you know. I need to understand what is happening." "At lunch, dear. This isn't the place for certain conversations." Mrs. Thompson looked meaningfully at the security cameras in the corners of the reception. "But I can give you a hint. Go to the company's historical archive today. Request access to the documents from 1952 to 1960 and look for, in the box marked Anthony Smith, personal documents. Your grandmother always said that when the time came, you would know what to do with what you found there." Sarah nodded, still dazed, and headed to her office on the 15th floor. The morning passed in slow motion. She tried to focus on the quarterly financial reports, but her mind was completely absorbed by the revelations of the past few days. At noon, she went down to the basement of the building, where the company's historical archive was located. The room was spacious and air-conditioned, with metal shelves extending from floor to ceiling, filled with file boxes organized chronologically. The smell of old paper and mildew, mixed with the chemical aroma of preservation products, Sarah located the section from the 1950s and began searching for the box mentioned by Mrs. Thompson. "Can I help you?" The male voice startled her. It was Edward Smith, the company's CFO, a man in his 50s, always serious, with thick-rimmed glasses and a perpetually stern expression that intimidated even the oldest employees. "Mr. Smith, I was looking for some old documents for a project." Sarah tried to sound casual, but her voice came out slightly high-pitched. Edward approached, observing the boxes she was examining. "Documents from Anthony Smith, right?" Sarah stared at him, surprised. "How did you—" "Sarah, sit over there." Edward pointed to a small metal table in the center of the room. "We need to talk." With her heart racing, Sarah complied. Edward pulled out a chair and sat across from her, removing his glasses to clean them, a gesture she had noticed he did when he was nervous. "Sarah, for the past 8 months I have been, let's say, your most visible professional obstacle. I questioned your reports, criticized your analyses, and was tough on your evaluations." "Yes, sir. I know my work still needs improvement and—" "Stop!" Edward raised his hand. "You don't understand. I wasn't being tough because your work is bad. I was being tough because your work is exceptionally good, and that made me nervous." Sarah furrowed her brow, confused. "Let me explain better." Edward leaned back in his chair. 3 years ago, I received a call from a woman who identified herself only as a friend of the Smith family. She told me that soon a young woman named Sarah Smith would be hired by the company, and that I should keep an eye on her. Not to harm her, but to protect her. Protect her from what? From people who didn't want the truth about the Smith inheritance to come to light. Edward put his glasses back on. "Sarah, your family left a considerable fortune. We're talking about several properties in New York City, stock investments, bank accounts in 3 different countries. But they also left some dangerous doubts." Sarah felt a chill. "What kind of doubts?" "Your great-grandfather Anthony did business with people who, let's say, they don't like it when they don't get what they are owed. And these people have patiently waited for over 20 years for a Smith heir to appear. But my grandmother, your grandmother, was very clever. She knew that as long as no one knew of your existence, you would be safe. But now that you are here, working at the company that was rightfully hers, these people will come forward." Sarah suddenly felt claustrophobic in that underground room. "Edward, what should I do? First, we need to find all the documents that prove your legitimacy as an heiress. Second, we will prepare you for the challenges to come." Edward stood up and walked to a specific shelf. "The box you're looking for isn't here." "What do you mean?" "I moved it to a safer location 3 years ago when I learned you would be working here." Edward pulled a small key from his pocket. "It's in my office, inside my private safe. But before I show it to you, I need to make sure you're ready for what you will find." "Edward, my daughter turns 7 next week. I work at a company where apparently half the people know my family better than I do. I found out that my grandmother, whom I thought was dead, is alive and hiding somewhere. I discovered that I am the heiress of a fortune I didn't even know existed. Do you think I might not be ready for something?" Edward smiled for the first time since Sarah had met him. "Your grandmother was right about you. She said that when the time came, you would have the necessary courage. Did she talk to you?" "No, Sarah, but she left a letter for me too." "A letter I was supposed to give to you today, October 14th. Edward checked his watch. "And it's exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Your grandmother has always been very precise with time." Sarah laughed nervously. It was true. Grandmother Dora had always been obsessed with punctuality. When Sarah was a child, she would pick her up from school exactly 10 minutes before the bell every day. "Edward, there's one more thing. I need to ask, what are these dangerous people like? I'm afraid for Sophie." Edward's expression turned serious. "That's why your grandmother was so careful, Sarah, and that's why you're not alone in this. Edward, Gabrielle, Mrs. Thompson, we have all been protecting you, even without you knowing. And we will continue to protect you and Sophie. But who are these people? Fake heirs, mainly. People who claim to be distant relatives and have appeared over the years, trying to claim parts of the inheritance. There are also some dubious creditors that your great-grandfather may or may not have owed money to. And Edward hesitated. And what? And there's a lawyer, Dr. Victor Collins, who has represented some of these supposed heirs. He is persistent and not very ethical. Sarah swallowed hard. When will I see these documents?
Now, if you want.
But Sarah, once you see what's in that box, your life will change completely. There's no going back. Sarah thought of Sophie, playing at preschool at that very moment, unaware of all this complexity. She thought of her simple yet happy life, in Newark, in the busy mornings preparing lunchboxes, in the evenings watching cartoons on the old sofa in the living room. She thought of her grandmother, hidden somewhere, protecting her for 17 years. Robert, I want to see the documents. I want to know who I really am. Robert nodded and headed to the file room. Then let's go up to my office. And Sarah, yes? Welcome to the real Johnson family. Robert's office was on the 22nd floor, with a privileged view of Fifth Avenue. The walls were decorated with diplomas in economics and finance from respected universities, but Sarah noticed, for the first time, a small black-and-white photograph in a discreet frame on the desk, the same photo that Edward had shown her, with her great-grandfather Anthony and her grandmother Mary. "How long have you known about my family?" Sarah asked as Robert opened the safe embedded in the wall behind his desk. "Since I started working here 12 years ago. Edward told me the whole story when he hired me." Robert took out a carved wooden box, clearly old, with the initials ASM engraved on the lid. "But the person who really explained everything to me was your grandmother." Sarah straightened up in her chair. "Did you know her?" "Yes, I did. Once a year, always on December 15th, the anniversary of your great-grandfather's death, she would appear here in the office. Always very discreet, always after hours. She brought reports about her investments, gave instructions on how to manage the estate, and asked about you." "About me?" "She knew everything, Sarah. Your grades in school. When you passed the entrance exam for business administration at UNIPE, when you got pregnant with Sophie, when the girl's father disappeared," Robert placed the box on the desk, "and she was preparing everything for this moment." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. Her grandmother had been watching her whole life from a distance, like an invisible guardian angel. Robert carefully opened the box. Inside were carefully organized documents, old photographs, and some personal items. The first document he pulled out was a will dated 1972. "This is your great-grandfather Anthony's original will. In it, he leaves everything to your great-grandmother Carmen, not to be confused with Mrs. Thompson at the reception. When Carmen died in 1975, everything passed to your grandmother Mary as the only daughter." Sarah took the document with trembling hands. Even though she was not well versed in legal matters, she could understand that the numbers mentioned were substantial. Properties, stocks, investments. "Robert, how much money are we talking about?" Robert pulled out a modern folder from the box. "This is the updated asset report as of December last year. Your grandmother hired a financial consulting firm to manage everything discreetly." Sarah opened the folder, and her eyes widened. "The total estate was valued at $43 million. This can't be right," she whispered. "It is correct. 43 million, including this building where we work, 3 apartments in the trendy neighborhood, a house in the Hamptons, shares in Brazilian and foreign companies, and bank accounts in the US, Portugal, and France." Sarah leaned back in her chair, feeling dizzy. "Robert, I live in a rented 2-bedroom apartment. Sophie wears a public school uniform. I buy clothes on sale. How can I be worth 43 million? Because your grandmother made difficult choices to protect you. She could have given you a life of luxury, but she knew that would make her a target. It was safer for you to grow up as an ordinary person while she managed everything behind the scenes." Robert took out a sealed letter from the box. "This is for you. Your grandmother told me to deliver it to you today." Sarah carefully tore open the seal. The familiar handwriting comforted her and made her nostalgic at the same time. My dear Sarah, if you are reading this letter, it means the moment I planned for 20 years has arrived. I know you must be scared and confused, but I want you to know that every decision I made was for your well-being and that of little Sophie. The money you are discovering now comes with responsibilities and dangers. There are people who will try to take what is rightfully yours. There are others who will try to take advantage of you. But I trust that the strong and intelligent woman you have become will know how to navigate these turbulent waters. In the box, there are documents proving your legitimacy as an heir. There is also a key. This key opens a safe at Chase Bank on Fifth Avenue. There you will find more instructions and resources I prepared for the challenges you will face. Remember, you are not alone. Robert, Edward, Gabriel, and Mrs. Thompson are your allies. Trust them, but trust your own intuition even more. And Sarah, forgive a grandmother for not being physically present. Every day away from you and Sophie was a painful but necessary sacrifice. I hope that one day we can meet again. The key is hidden inside the music box that has always been in your living room. You will know where to look when the time comes. With all my love and pride, Grandma Dora P.S. Be careful with lawyer Victor Collins. He is not who he seems. Sarah finished the letter with tears in her eyes. The music box, of course. It was a small ballerina that played Für Elise and sat on the shelf in the living room of the apartment. Her grandmother had left it when she disappeared, and Sarah had kept it as a cherished memory. "Robert, I need to go home to get that key." "No!" His voice was firm. "Sarah, from now on, you can't do anything alone. If your grandmother is right about Lawyer Collins, he may be monitoring your movements." "Monitoring how?" "I don't know, but we can't take risks. I'll ask Edward to let you leave early today. Go pick up Sophie from school as usual. Go home, have dinner, do your regular routine. Tomorrow morning, Gabriel and I will go with you to the bank." Sarah nodded, still processing. "Robert, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. Why are you helping me?" "I mean, why are all of you helping me?" Robert smiled sadly. "Because your grandmother saved my daughter." "How so?" 10 years ago, my daughter Beatrice needed urgent heart surgery. The health insurance denied coverage, and private doctors charged a fortune that I didn't have. Beatrice was dying. Robert paused, emotional. One day, an elegant lady appeared at the hospital and offered to pay for the entire surgery. She didn't want to give her name, just said she was a family friend. I only found out years later that it was your grandmother. Sarah felt her heart warm. Even in hiding, her grandmother continued to do good. Beatrice is well today. She is 19, studying medicine at NYU, all thanks to your grandmother's generosity. Robert carefully closed the box. "Sarah, your family has a legacy of kindness, not just money. Your grandmother taught me that true wealth is being able to help others." Sarah stood up, feeling different. Not just from the weight of the financial inheritance, but from the weight of the moral responsibility she had just discovered. "Robert, there's one more thing. The letter mentions that I will face challenges." "What kind of challenges?" Robert hesitated before answering. "Sarah, since last night, 3 different people have called here asking about you, all identifying themselves as distant relatives. One of them specifically mentioned knowing about the small inheritance of the Smith family." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Does that mean that the news of your discovery is already spreading, and the people your grandmother feared are starting to appear?" Sarah looked out the office window, watching the hustle and bustle of the city 22 floors below. Down there, ordinary people lived their ordinary lives, unaware that a single mother from Newark had just discovered she was the heir to a fortune, and that her quiet life was about to turn into a battle she didn't even know existed. "Robert, I'm scared." "It's normal to be scared, Sarah, but remember, you have the strength of the Smith family running through your veins, and there are people who would give their lives to protect you and Sophie." Sarah took a deep breath, thinking of her daughter waiting for her at school, innocent of all this complexity. "Then let's prepare for war." Night had fallen over Newark when Sarah finally arrived home with Sophie. The two-bedroom apartment on the third floor of a building without an elevator had never seemed so small and vulnerable as it did at that moment. She looked around the modestly furnished living room, the two-seater sofa bought at a Macy's clearance sale, the 32-inch television that had been her birthday gift to herself the previous year, the simple MDF bookshelf where the small music box now sat, which she knew contained the key to her future. "Mummy, why are you so quiet today?" Sophie asked as she took off her school uniform, revealing scraped knees typical of an active 7-year-old. Her curly hair, a genetic inheritance from Sarah, was tied in a slightly messy ponytail after a whole day of playing at recess. "I'm just thinking about work, my daughter." "Nothing much." Sarah forced a smile, trying to maintain the normalcy that was so precious to both of them. "How about we make pasta with tomato sauce for dinner? With grated cheese." Sophie's brown eyes lit up. "With plenty of grated cheese," Sarah confirmed, kissing her daughter's forehead. As she prepared dinner in the tiny open kitchen, so small that two people could barely move comfortably, Sarah watched Sophie do her homework at the living room table. The girl bit the tip of her pencil as she focused on the math problems, a habit she had inherited from her mother. It was in these quiet moments that Sarah felt the weight of the responsibility of raising her alone the most. After dinner, while Sophie watched cartoons on the television, Sarah discreetly approached the bookshelf. The music box was small, made of dark wood with worn gold details. As a child, Sarah loved to wind it up and watch the little ballerina spin to the tune of the classical melody. Carefully, she examined the base of the box. Her fingers found a small, almost imperceptible bump. Pressing lightly, a tiny secret drawer opened, revealing a golden key and a folded piece of paper. "Sarah, trust your intuition. The bank, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Gabrielle has instructions. Be careful of who follows you. VD Grandma Dora." Even after 17 years, she still managed to surprise Sarah with her meticulous foresight. "Mommy, what is that?" Sophie had silently approached, her natural curiosity piqued by her mother's mysterious activity. Sarah quickly closed the secret drawer. "It's just a little something from Grandma that I was keeping, sweetheart. Nothing important. From Grandma Dora. The one who disappeared." Sarah felt her heart tighten. Sophie had always shown curiosity about the great-grandmother she had never met, especially when she saw other kids with their grandmothers at school. "Yes, from Grandma Dora. Sophie, I need to tell you something important." They both sat on the sofa, and Sarah took her daughter's small hands in hers. "Remember I told you that Grandma Dora disappeared when I was a teenager?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Well, I found out today that she didn't really disappear. She had to hide to protect us." "Protect us from what?" Sarah chose her words carefully. "From people who wanted things that weren't theirs. But the important thing is that she has always been looking out for us, even from afar." "Is she alive?" Sophie's voice carried a mix of hope and astonishment. "Yes, my daughter. She is alive." Sophie was silent for a moment, processing the information. "Can I meet her?" "I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so." That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the dark ceiling. Her mind spun between the revelations of the day and concerns about the future weighed heavily on her mind. How would she protect Sophie if there were truly dangerous people after the inheritance? How could she reconcile a life of wealth with the simple values she had always tried to teach her daughter? Her phone buzzed with a message from Gabrielle. "Are you okay? Tomorrow at 9:45 a.m. in the company lobby. We'll go to the bank together. Sleep well. There's discreet security watching your building tonight." Sarah got up and looked out the window. A dark car was parked under a streetlight, which was unusual at that hour in her quiet residential street. Instead of feeling threatened, she felt strangely protected. For the first time in 17 years, she was not completely alone in the world. The next morning, Sarah dropped Sophie off at school with Mrs. Thompson, the principal, who had always been especially kind to both of them. "If anything happens, or if anyone strange shows up here looking for information about me or Sophie, please call me immediately. Mrs. Thompson." A 60-year-old woman with enough experience to recognize genuine concern nodded seriously. "You can count on me, Sarah. Sophie is safe here." The ride to the company passed quickly in the Uber that Sarah had called, a luxury she rarely allowed herself. But it felt appropriate given the extraordinary circumstances. Gabrielle was waiting for her in the lobby, elegant as always, but Sarah noticed a subtle tension in her posture. "Ready?" Gabrielle asked, linking her arm with Sarah's in a gesture that seemed casual but was clearly protective. "No, but we're going anyway," Sarah replied honestly. Chase Bank was only 5 blocks from the company, but they decided to take a taxi. During the ride, Gabrielle explained what she knew about the procedure. "The safe is in the name of Mary Smith, but there are specific instructions that it can be accessed by you upon presentation of the key and identification documents. Your grandmother was very meticulous with the legal details. Gabrielle, can I ask you something? Why did you come to the United States? I mean, if your family was well established in France?" Gabrielle looked out the taxi window, watching the frantic movement of the avenue. "Because my grandmother Marguerite made me promise on her deathbed that I would come here to take care of the family that remained. She always regretted leaving Brazil, abandoning the family. She wanted me to correct that mistake, and you left your life in France for a promise. I left my life in France because I discovered that my true family was here." Gabrielle smiled. "Besides, I was already married to a man who cared more about my inheritance than about me. Coming to the United States was my salvation, not my sacrifice." The bank was an imposing building of glass and marble, with discreet but visible security. They were led to a private room, where a manager was waiting for them with forms and security protocols. "Mrs. Smith," the manager, a middle-aged man in a sharp suit, greeted Sarah formally. "We have been waiting for your visit for a long time. Miss Mary left very specific instructions." Sarah presented the key and her documents. Everything was meticulously verified before they were led to the bank's basement, where the safety deposit boxes were located in a secure room with an independent ventilation system. Safe 247 was larger than Sarah had expected. When opened, it revealed not only documents and jewelry, but also neatly organized stacks of cash, photographs, and a sealed letter addressed to "My dear Sarah," to be opened at the bank. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the letter. "My dear granddaughter, if you are reading this at the bank, it means our little family conspiracy is working. Inside this safe are resources enough for any emergency that may arise. Use them wisely, but more important than the money are the photographs. They tell the story of our family that you never knew, and there is one in particular that will explain why I had to hide. Look for the photo where Edward appears as a child. Yes, our CEO is not just an ally, he is family too, and this connection will be crucial to face what lies ahead. Attorney Collins will try to contact you in the coming days. Do not accept any meetings with him alone. He represents people who want to destroy our family. Trust Gabrielle, trust Robert, trust Edward. But above all, trust yourself. You are stronger than you think. All my love, Grandma Dora." Sarah searched through the photographs until she found the one mentioned in the letter. It was a faded color family photo showing her grandmother as a young woman next to Anthony, and a child of about 10 years old whom she recognized immediately, Edward. "Gabrielle," she whispered, showing the photo. "Edward is your cousin," Gabrielle gently completed, "son of your great-grandfather's younger brother. Your grandmother and his mother were very close. That's why he was so determined to protect you." Sarah sat down in a chair provided by the bank, holding the photograph. In just 2 days, she had discovered that she had a French cousin, a second grandmother at the company reception, an ally in the CFO, and now a cousin who was a CEO. "How many more secrets does my family have?" she asked, half laughing, half crying. "A few," Gabrielle admitted, "but they were all kept to protect you. And now that you know the truth, we can work together to face what lies ahead." Outside the bank, unbeknownst to them, a man in a grey suit was watching the entrance through dark sunglasses, speaking softly on the phone. "Yes, Dr. Collins. She just left the bank." I confirm she is accessing the family resources. We can proceed with the plan. The battle for the Smith inheritance was just beginning. 3 days after the visit to the bank, Sarah was trying to maintain a normal routine, but the feeling of being watched followed her constantly. It was a rainy Monday, typical of October, in New York City when her phone rang during lunch hour. The number was unknown. "Hello, Sarah Johnson." The male voice was smooth, almost seductive, with a refined New York accent. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Dr. Victor Collins, an attorney specializing in estate law. I represent some members of the Smith family who would very much like to meet you." Sarah felt her blood run cold. It was exactly the man her grandmother had warned her about. "I'm sorry, doctor, but I'm not interested in—" "Sarah, please don't hang up." His voice became more insistent. "I know you must be confused with everything you've recently discovered about your family. But there are aspects of the Smith inheritance that may not have been adequately explained to you." "What aspects?" Well, for example, the fact that Anthony Smith had other heirs besides your great-grandmother Carmen. Heirs who have legitimate rights to the estate you just discovered." Sarah clenched her free fist, remembering Robert's advice about not accepting meetings alone. "Dr. Collins, if you have legal matters to discuss, you can contact the lawyers at Tech Innovations." "I will not discuss family matters with strangers." Sarah. His voice took on a patronizing tone that irritated her deeply. "You are a smart young woman, but naive. You are being manipulated by people who have their own interests in your inheritance. How about we meet this afternoon? I can clarify many things that could change your perspective on this situation." "No, thank you. And I ask that you do not call me again." "Sarah, before you hang up, let me ask you a question. Are you sure your daughter is safe at school today?" The world stopped. Sarah felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. "What did you say?" "Public schools in Newark don't have the best security, do they? Especially Lincoln Elementary School, where little Sophie is in 2nd grade, Class B, with Mrs. Johnson." Sarah stood up so quickly that she knocked over her chair. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. "If you've come near my daughter, Calm down, Sarah. No one wants to harm the child. I just want a civilized conversation about estate rights. How about today at 5 in the afternoon at Central Cafe on Main Street? Just 1 hour. You can bring a companion if you wish." The call ended before Sarah could respond. She immediately dialed the school. "Lincoln Elementary School, good morning. Mrs. Smith, please." "This is Sarah, Sophie's mother. Is my daughter okay? Is she at school?" "Of course she is, Sarah. I just saw her at recess." "Why the concern?" "Mrs. Smith, please do not let anyone pick up Sophie today except for me. No one. And if any strange person shows up at the school asking about her, call me immediately." "Sarah, is everything all right? You sound scared. Just a precaution. Please take good care of her." Sarah hung up and immediately called Gabrielle. "Attorney Collins called me. He knows about Sophie, knows what school she attends, even the name of her teacher." "Damn!" Gabrielle cursed in French. "Sarah, where are you?" "At the office. Don't leave there." "I'm coming up now." 5 minutes later, Gabriel entered Sarah's office accompanied by Edward and Robert. The small room became crowded, but no one minded the tight space. "Sarah, tell us everything," Edward said, his voice carrying an authority she had never noticed before. After she recounted the phone conversation, Edward took out his cell phone and made a few quick calls. "Done. There are 2 security guards on their way to Sophie's school. They will position themselves discreetly and stay there until you pick her up. And there's a guard on the way to your house as well. Edward, I can't afford security." "Sarah," Robert interrupted, "you still don't understand. You are no longer a junior financial analyst who needs to worry about expenses. You are the heir to a considerable fortune, and that means you have resources to protect yourself. But it also means I've become a target," Sarah said, the reality of the situation finally crystallizing. "Exactly," Gabrielle confirmed. "And Collins is just the beginning. Sarah, your grandmother was right when she said there would be people trying to take what is yours." Edward moved closer to the window, looking out at the city below. "The problem is that Collins is a competent attorney, albeit unethical. If he is representing supposed heirs, he must have some documentation that at least looks legitimate. What kind of documentation? Sarah asked. Forged birth certificates, fraudulent wills, bought witness statements, Robert explained. In the world of estate law, especially when a lot of money is involved, it's impressive what people can forge. So, what do we do? First, you are not going to that meeting, Edward said firmly. Second, we're going to hire the best attorneys in New York City to review all the inheritance documentation and prepare for a legal battle. Third, we will significantly increase security around you and Sophie. Sarah sat heavily in her chair. Edward, I need to ask you something. Why did you never tell me we are cousins? Edward sighed and turned to her. Because your grandmother asked me not to tell you until you discovered it for yourself. She wanted you to learn about the family gradually, so you wouldn't be overwhelmed all at once. And who else in our family is alive that they didn't tell me about? Sarah, Gabrielle gently interjected, your grandmother has 3 living sisters. 2 live in the countryside of Portugal, and 1 lives here in Brazil, in Ribeirão Preto. They know about you, but your grandmother asked them to wait until the inheritance situation was resolved. Sarah laughed bitterly. Great. So I have aunts I don't know, a cousin who has been working with me for 8 months without telling me who he is, a French cousin, a second grandmother at the reception, and now a criminal lawyer threatening my daughter. Any more surprises? Actually, Robert said hesitantly, there's one more thing. Remember I mentioned that 3 people called asking about you? Yes, one of them... She identified herself as Marcella Smith, claiming to be her second cousin. She wants to schedule a meeting to meet the family. And, we checked the records. There is no Marcella Smith in the Smith family tree. Marina felt a headache starting. So she's just another imposter? Well, probably. But the concerning part is that she knew specific details about the family that only someone very well informed could know. What kind of details? Oh, she mentioned that your grandmother had a crescent-shaped scar on her left wrist, a result of a childhood accident. Is that true? Marina nodded slowly. Yes, it's true. Grandma Dora always said she cut herself on a shard of glass when she was 8. So someone with access to very personal information about your grandmother is feeding these imposters specific data. Marina's phone rang again. Another unknown number. Dr. Collins again? Edward asked. Marina answered and put it on speaker. Marina, I hope you've thought about our conversation. I'll be at Central Cafe at 5 o'clock. It's really in your interest to show up. Dr. Collins, Edward interjected, this is Edward Smith, CEO of Tech Innovations and Marina's cousin. Any legal communication regarding inheritance matters should be directed to our attorneys. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ah, Edward, what an interesting coincidence. Did you know there are some irregularities in the documentation proving your own kinship with the Smith family? Documents that might not withstand rigorous legal scrutiny? Edward paled slightly but kept his voice steady. Dr. Collins, if you have legal issues to raise, do so through the appropriate channels. Oh, but I will, Edward. You can be sure of that. Marina, the meeting offer still stands. 5 o'clock. Central Cafe, come or things might get complicated for your entire new family. The call ended, leaving a tense silence in the room. Edward, Marina said quietly, what irregularities could he be talking about? Edward sat heavily in a chair. Marina, there's something I haven't told you about my own situation. When my parents died, I was 15. Your grandmother helped me forge some documents so I could inherit the family assets and not go to an orphanage. What kind of documents? And that my original birth certificate was lost in a fire. Your grandmother knew people who, let's say, managed to get a new certificate with some altered dates so I could inherit. Robert sighed. Edward, why didn't you ever tell me this? Because it was over 20 years ago. I was just a kid trying to survive. Marina looked at the 3 of them, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. It wasn't just her inheritance at stake. It was the future of an entire family that had built itself around secrets and half-truths to protect themselves. All right, she finally said. I'll go to the meeting. Marina, no, Gabrielle protested. I'm going to the meeting, but not alone. Edward Robert, you're coming with me. I want to hear what this man has to say, and I want him to know that I won't be intimidated. Edward smiled for the first time that day. Now you're starting to sound like a true Smith. I just hope we know what we're getting into, Robert murmured. Outside the Tech Innovations building, in a rental car parked on the street, Dr. Victor Collins hung up the listening device and smiled with satisfaction. Through contacts in the private investigation underworld, he had managed to plant listening devices in the company's main offices. Now he knew exactly what the weaknesses of the Smith family were, and he knew how to exploit them. The Central Cafe on Main Street was a traditional establishment, with marble tables, dark wooden chairs, and a nostalgic air reminiscent of the 1950s. At 5 o'clock sharp on a rainy Monday, Marina entered the place, accompanied by Edward and Robert, all visibly tense but determined to face the situation. Dr. Victor Collins was already waiting for them at a table in the back, strategically positioned to have a complete view of the cafe and the exits. He was a man of about 55, tall and elegant, with perfectly styled grey hair and a clearly expensive navy suit. His eyes were a cold grey that seemed to evaluate and calculate every movement around him. Marina, he stood up with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What a pleasure to finally meet you in person. And Edward, Robert, what a pleasant surprise to have you here as well. Marina immediately noticed how he knew Robert, despite them never having been officially introduced. Another piece of evidence that Collins had done thorough research on all of them. Dr. Collins, Marina said, keeping her voice steady despite her nervousness. Let's get straight to the point. What exactly do you want? A coffee first, business later. It's Brazilian civility, isn't it? He gestured to the waiter. 3 espressos and a cappuccino for the lady. I imagine the fact that he knew her preference for cappuccino, information that could only have been obtained through surveillance or detailed investigation, made Marina shiver. How do you know my coffee preference? Marina, my dear, when you represent clients with interests in an inheritance of $43 million, you do your homework. Collins leaned back in his chair with a satisfied air. I know you have cappuccino every morning at the bakery near your house. I know your daughter Sophie loves chocolate truffles and hates chayote. And I know you have a habit of biting your lip when you're nervous, just like you are doing now. Edward leaned forward, clearly irritated. Dr. Collins, unauthorized surveillance is a crime. I hope you have lawyers as good as the ones you claim to represent. Edward, always so impetuous. Just like your father, Raphael Smith. Collins smiled maliciously. By the way, what an interesting coincidence that you work at the very company you should inherit, considering your father was just a minority partner of Anthony Smith. Marina looked at Edward, surprised. Your father was a partner in the company? He was, Edward confirmed through clenched teeth. But that's irrelevant to... Oh, but it is. Dr. Collins pulled a leather folder from his briefcase. You see, when Anthony Smith died in 1972, he owed a considerable sum to Edward's father, a debt that was never settled by the widow Carmen, nor later by Mary Smith. Robert frowned. What kind of debt? Loans for business expansion, investments in equipment, personal guarantees that Anthony provided and were never honored. Dr. Collins opened the folder and pulled out yellow documents. We're talking about approximately $8 million in current value. Sarah felt her stomach churn. Does that mean that technically Edward has a legitimate debt against the Smith estate? Yes. Dr. Collins turned to Edward. But don't worry, young man. I'm not here to collect that debt. I'm here to offer a solution that benefits everyone. What kind of solution? Sarah asked suspiciously. Dr. Collins paused dramatically as the waiter served the coffees. He only resumed the conversation when they were alone again. My clients, the true Smith heirs, are willing to make a generous settlement. Sarah keeps $5 million, Edward pays off his father's debt and keeps $3 million, and the rest goes to the legitimate heirs. $5 million? Sarah nearly choked on her cappuccino. From an inheritance of $43 million? Sarah, dear, 5 million is more money than you would spend in 10 lifetimes. It's a generous offer considering that, he paused, as if carefully choosing his words, considering the questionable circumstances of your legitimacy as an heir. Robert leaned forward. What questionable circumstances? Dr. Collins pulled out another document from the folder. Well, for example, the fact that Mary Smith never officially married Anthony Smith. The silence that followed was heavy as lead. What are you saying? Sarah whispered. I'm saying that your grandmother and great-grandfather lived together for 20 years, but never legalized their union. Technically, she was just a concubine, not a legitimate wife. Edward slammed his fist on the table, making the cups clink. That's a lie! Oh, Edward, I wish it were. Dr. Collins showed the document. This is a marriage certificate. Anthony Smith married Carmen Rodriguez in 1948, the mother of Mary Smith. When Carmen died in 1975, he was a widower. He never remarried. Sarah felt as if the ground was opening beneath her feet. Does that mean my grandmother was... She was Anthony's daughter, not his wife. Your great-grandmother Carmen was the legitimate wife. Dr. Collins smiled like a predator that had just cornered its prey. And if Mary was a daughter, not a wife, then the inheritance situation changes completely. Robert was examining the document. This paper looks authentic, but nothing, Robert. It was issued by St. Patrick's Cathedral in 1948. All the stamps, all the signatures, everything checks out. Dr. Collins put the document away. The question is, did Mary know this truth and deliberately falsified information to pass herself off as a widow when she was actually an orphaned daughter? Sarah abruptly stood up, feeling nauseous. I need some air. Edward stood up too. Sarah, don't believe him. He's trying to manipulate you. Manipulate? Dr. Collins laughed. Edward, I presented official documents. These are not opinions. They are facts. The question now is, do you want to resolve this civilly, or do you prefer everything to be exposed publicly in a lawsuit that could last for years? Sarah turned to him, her eyes shining with anger. And who are these supposed true heirs? Or legitimate children of Anthony Smith who were officially recognized but lived away from the family for personal reasons? People who have indisputable rights to the estate. Names, Edward demanded. We want names. Charles Smith, born in 1950, son of Anthony with an old high school sweetheart, officially recognized in 1972, shortly before his father's death. Dr. Collins pulled out more documents. And Marcella Smith, daughter of Charles, thus the legitimate granddaughter of Anthony. Sarah remembered the name. Marcella Smith, she called the company. Exactly. My legitimate client who is trying to reclaim what is rightfully hers. Robert was studying the documents with an increasingly worried expression. Edward, these papers look authentic. The dates, the stamps, the signatures. Of course they look authentic. Edward exploded. Dr. Collins probably paid a fortune to forge all this. Edward, be careful with unfounded accusations, Dr. Collins said calmly. I can sue you for defamation. Sarah returned to the table, breathing deeply. Dr. Collins, even if these documents are true, it doesn't change the fact that my grandmother managed this estate for decades. She had acquired rights. Oh, but did she really? Dr. Collins smiled. Sarah, your grandmother disappeared in 2008. In the last 17 years, who exactly managed the estate? Who signed documents? Who made financial decisions? Sarah looked at Robert and Edward, seeing the worried recognition in their eyes. Don't tell me that, she began. That technically, for the last 17 years, the Smith estate has been managed by people without legal authority to do so. Dr. Collins finished. Which makes all transactions during this period legally questionable. Edward stood up, clearly losing patience. Dr. Collins, enough. What exactly is your proposal? Simple. Sarah accepts the 5 million and signs a waiver of any additional rights to the Smith estate. Edward pays off his father's debt and also waives any future claims. In exchange, my clients will not file a lawsuit that could leave all of you with nothing and still in debt to lawyers. And if we refuse, then tomorrow we file a post-mortem paternity investigation. an annulment action of all acts performed by Mary after 2008, and a restitution action for the estate. Dr. Collins checked his Rolex watch. Oh, and of course a criminal complaint for embezzlement and forgery of documents. Sarah felt the world spinning around her. In less than a week she had discovered she was an heir to a fortune, and now she was finding out that she might not be. Sarah Johnson was the heir to nothing. "How much time do we have to decide?" she asked in a weak voice. 48 hours. Today is Monday. Wednesday at 5 in the afternoon is the deadline. Collins stood up, left a $50 bill on the table to pay for the coffees, and grabbed his briefcase. "Sarah, I know you must be confused and scared, but think rationally. $5 million is more than enough to provide a comfortable life for you and Sophie. Don't be greedy enough to lose everything by wanting it all." He walked away, but returned to make one last comment. "Oh, and Sarah? Sophie is a beautiful girl. It would be a shame if all this legal confusion affected her stability, wouldn't it? Children are so vulnerable to abrupt changes." The implied threat made Sarah rise, like a lioness protecting her cub. "If you come near my daughter—" "Sarah, dear, I don't need to come near her. If you enter into a prolonged legal battle, it will be the system itself that may determine that Sophie needs a more stable environment while the financial issues are resolved." With that, Victor Collins left the cafe, leaving the three seated at a table full of doubts, fears, and documents that could destroy everything they had believed in. "Edward," Sarah said softly, "tell me the truth. Is it possible that my grandmother lied about everything?" Edward held her hand. "Sarah, I've known your grandmother for over 20 years. She is many things, mysterious, protective, even manipulative when necessary. But I have never seen her lie about fundamental issues. But what if these documents are true?" Robert was studying the papers that Collins had left. "Sarah, even if they are true, that doesn't mean you don't have rights. Acquired rights, property rights, inheritance rights. There are many legal variables at play, but he is right about one thing," Sarah said sadly. "If we enter into a prolonged legal battle, Sophie will suffer. And I can't allow that." Edward leaned back in his chair. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you. Something your grandmother made me promise I would only share in case of absolute emergency." "What?" "Your grandmother is not just alive. She's here in New York City, and I think it's time for you to meet." The rain had stopped, but the grey clouds still dominated the New York sky when Sarah, Edward, and Robert left the cafe. The traffic on Main Street was buzzing with its usual chaotic rhythm, but Sarah barely noticed the movement around her. Her mind was completely absorbed by Edward's revelation. "She's here? In New York City? All this time?" Sarah stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, forcing Edward to stop as well. "Sarah, your grandmother never really disappeared. She moved to a discreet apartment on Park Avenue, just 15 minutes from here." Edward looked around, checking to see if they were being watched. "She has followed every phase of your life, your graduation, Sophie's birth, your first jobs. Always from a distance, always protecting you." Robert approached them. "Edward, if Grandmother Mary is here, why don't we resolve this situation directly with her? She can clarify all these questions about Collins' documents." "Because she is very ill, Robert." Edward's voice came out heavy with emotion. "Advanced pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave her 6 months, and that was 4 months ago." Sarah felt her legs weaken. She leaned against a shop window, trying to process this devastating information. She is dying. That's why she accelerated this whole process. That's why you were hired at the company right now. Why all these revelations are happening at the same time." Edward held her arm for support. "She wants to resolve everything before she leaves for good. Edward, I need to see her now. Sarah, are you sure? She's very different from how you remember. The illness has changed her physically a lot. Edward, my grandmother disappeared from my life when I was 15. I spent 17 years thinking she was dead, blaming myself for not being a better granddaughter, dreaming of one last hug, one last, 'I love you.'" Sarah wiped away the tears that were starting to fall. "If she is dying, I need to make the most of every minute we have left." Robert looked at his watch. "It's almost 6 in the evening. Sarah, shouldn't you pick up Sophie from school? Oh my God, Sophie. Sarah grabbed her phone, feeling like a terrible mother for forgetting her daughter amidst the emotional turmoil. Mrs. Smith? It's me, Sarah. Can you keep Sophie at school for one more hour? It's a family emergency. Thank you, you're an angel. Edward signaled for a taxi. Let's all go together. Robert, you need to meet Grandmother Mary in person. And Sarah, prepare yourself emotionally. The apartment was in an elegant yet discreet building on Park Avenue, one of the most prestigious addresses in New York City. During the taxi ride, Edward explained how the logistics had worked over the past few years. Your grandmother hired a private nurse, Grace, who lives with her and takes care of everything. She has the best doctors, the best treatments, but she didn't want aggressive chemotherapy. She said she preferred quality of life in her last months. How did you communicate? Monthly meetings at her doctor's office. She would give instructions about the company, about you, about managing the estate. And she always asked about Sophie. Edward smiled sadly. She has dozens of photos of you and Sophie. Photos that I discreetly took and delivered to her. Sarah felt a mix of gratitude and anger. Gratitude for being loved and protected. Anger for being deprived of all those years with her grandmother. The doorman of the building, a gentleman in his 60s with a pristine uniform, greeted Edward as if he knew him well. Good afternoon, Mr. Edward. Is Grandmother Mary expecting? Yes, Mr. Manuel. This is Sarah, her granddaughter. The doorman's eyes lit up. The girl, Sarah. Grandmother? Mary Smith talked about Mrs. Grace every day. What a joy to finally meet you. Another person who knew about her existence, while she had no idea about her grandmother. Sarah began to wonder how many people in New York City knew her personal story better than she did. The elevator ascended silently to the 12th floor. Edward stopped in front of door 121 and rang the bell in a specific way. 3 short rings, a pause, 2 long rings. It's a code she created, he explained, to make sure of who is visiting. The door opened, revealing a woman of about 50, dressed in a white nurse's uniform, but with the warm smile of someone who does much more than just care for a patient's health. Mrs. Grace, this is Sarah. Edward made the introductions. Sarah. Mrs. Grace embraced her as if she were a long-lost daughter. Your grandmother is in the room, getting ready to welcome you. She's as nervous as you are, you know. She changed her outfit 3 times today. The apartment was spacious and tastefully decorated, but Sarah immediately recognized several objects from her childhood home. The rocking chair where her grandmother used to read stories to her. The solid wood sideboard where family photographs were displayed. Even the Persian rug in the living room that she loved to walk on barefoot when she was a child. She brought everything from the old house, Mrs. Grace explained, noticing the recognition in Sarah's eyes. She said one day you would come to visit and wanted you to feel at home. A door opened in the hallway, and Sarah felt her heart stop. There was her grandmother, thinner, more fragile, with completely white hair, where there had once been only a few grey strands, but with the same loving eyes and the same smile that had defined her childhood. My dear granddaughter, Mary Smith said, her voice choked with emotion. Sarah ran to her, like a 5-year-old child would run to her grandmother's embrace. When they hugged, 17 years of longing, pain, confusion, and love poured out in tears that seemed endless. Grandma, why? Why did you leave me? Because I loved you too much to let anything happen to you, Mary Smith whispered, stroking Sarah's hair as she used to when she was little. Forgive a grandmother for being a scared old woman, but it was the only way to protect you. They remained embraced for several minutes until Mary gently led Sarah to the living room sofa. Edward and Robert respectfully kept their distance, allowing grandmother and granddaughter to have their moment. Grandma, I need to know about the documents that Dr. Collins showed. Is it true that you weren't married to my great-grandfather? Mary sighed deeply. Sarah, there are simple truths, and there are complicated truths. The complicated truth is that I was Antonio's daughter, not his wife. Sarah felt the ground disappear again. So Collins was right? Collins was partially right. Yes, Antonio was my father, not my husband. Yes, my mother Carmen was his legitimate wife. But there are parts of the story that Collins doesn't know. What parts? Mary got up and walked to the sideboard, retrieving an old wooden box from a drawer. Sarah, when my mother died, my father was devastated. He officially adopted me as his daughter. I was 20 at the time, and made me his sole universal heir. But then all the inheritance documents you found are legitimate. I inherited everything as an adopted daughter, not as a wife. The difference is purely technical, but legally, my rights have always been indisputable. Edward approached. Mrs. Mary Smith, why didn't you clarify this from the beginning? Because it was safer for people to think I was Antonio's widow. A wealthy widow raises fewer suspicions than an heir daughter. Mary opened the box, revealing carefully preserved documents, but mainly because there were others who claimed to be Antonio's children, and I wanted to protect Sarah from all that confusion until she was ready. Robert examined the documents. Mrs. Mary Smith, do these papers prove your official adoption? They do. And more than that, they prove that Antonio expressly excluded any other possible heirs from his inheritance, including this Charles Smith that Collins represents. Sarah frowned. What do you mean, excluded? Sarah, your great-grandfather had some relationships before marrying my mother. There were rumors of unacknowledged children, people who appeared over the years claiming rights. That's why he was very specific in his final will. I leave all my assets to my adopted daughter, Mary Smith, expressly excluding any other person who may claim kinship or inheritance rights. Edward smiled for the first time in hours. That means that even if Charles Smith is indeed Antonio's son, which is doubtful, he was expressly excluded from the inheritance. Mary returned to the sofa next to Sarah. Granddaughter, you are the legitimate heir to everything. You always have been and you always will be. But Grandma, why all this mystery? Why didn't you tell me the truth from the start? Mary held Sarah's hands between hers, hands that now seemed fragile as tissue paper. Because, my dear, when you have a lot of money, you also have many enemies. And I preferred that you grew up protected from the greed of others, that you developed your own values and character before knowing about the inheritance. And now you are a strong woman, mother of a wonderful girl, and you are ready to take on what has always been yours. Mary smiled. And now I can depart in peace, knowing that you are prepared to protect our family. Sarah felt her heart tighten. Grandma, don't talk about departing. Now that we've found each other again. Sarah, dear, we have little time, but let's make the most of it. And I want to meet my great-granddaughter in person before saying goodbye for good. Sophie is going to go crazy when she finds out she has a great-grandmother. And I'm going to be overjoyed when I finally meet this girl who is the light of your life. Sarah hugged her grandmother again, this time knowing it wouldn't be a goodbye, but a new beginning. They had a legal battle ahead with Victor Collins and his fraudulent clients, but now they had the truth on their side. And more importantly, they had a family united to face any storm that might come. The next morning, Tuesday, Mary Smith's apartment transformed into a true operations center. The dining table was covered with documents, laptops, and phones as the Smith family and their allies meticulously planned their response to Victor Collins's ultimatum. Mrs. Thompson served coffee and homemade pastries, creating a domestic atmosphere that contrasted with the seriousness of the situation. Sarah had picked up Sophie from school the night before and carefully explained that her great-grandmother was alive and very much wanted to meet her. The girl's reaction was pure joy mixed with a child's natural curiosity. "Mummy, why did my great-grandmother hide for so long?" Sophie asked, while playing with an old puzzle that Mary had saved, especially for this moment. "Because sometimes adults do difficult things to protect the people they love," Sarah replied, watching how her grandmother and daughter interacted naturally, as if there were not 17 years of separation between the generations. Mary, despite her physical frailty, was radiant. Sophie, you are even more beautiful than in the photographs that Uncle Edward showed me. And much smarter too. Great-grandma, do you have pictures of me? Sophie approached, fascinated. I have an entire album just for you, my princess. Want to see? As grandmother and great-granddaughter flipped through the album, filled with photos that Edward had discreetly taken over the years, Sarah joined the group of adults planning the legal strategy. Robert had arrived early, accompanied by two people Sarah didn't know, a woman in her 40s, elegantly dressed, and an older man in his 60s with a commanding presence. "Sarah, let me introduce our heavy artillery," Edward said. "This is Dr. Patricia Morgan, one of the best estate attorneys in the country. And this is Dr. Fernando Lopez, a private investigator specializing in document fraud." Dr. Patricia stood up to greet Sarah. "Mrs. Smith, I've already analyzed the documents that Dr. Collins presented yesterday. I can categorically state that at least 3 of them are forgeries." "How can you be sure?" "Because I personally handled cases involving these same forged documents 5 years ago. Collins has been using the same strategy with other wealthy families." Patricia opened a laptop and showed a presentation. "This supposed Charles Smith is a fictional character. Dr. Lopez managed to trace his true identity." Dr. Fernando approached, carrying a bulky folder. "Sarah, Charles Smith is actually Claudio Santos Moreira, a professional con artist with an extensive criminal record. Fraud, forgery, embezzlement. He has been partnering with Collins for years. And his daughter Marcella, also fake. Her real name is Marcia Santos, a former stripper and current partner of Charles. She plays the role of the legitimate heir, while he pretends to be the distant relative." Sarah sat heavily in a chair. "So everything was a lie?" "Not everything," Dr. Patricia corrected. "The marriage certificate between Anthony and Carmen is genuine. But this actually strengthens your position because it confirms that Mrs. Mary Smith is the legitimate daughter and legal heir." Mary approached the group, leaving Sophie entertained with the puzzles. "Patricia, dear, it's been so long. How is your mother?" "Mrs. Smith." Patricia stood up to hug the elderly woman. "Mom is well. She always asks about you. She never forgot how you helped when Dad lost his job." Sarah looked surprised. "You two know each other?" "Patricia is Mrs. Thompson's daughter, who worked as a housekeeper here for 15 years, Mary explained. "Patricia studied law on a scholarship I offered. She's one of the best attorneys in the city," another piece fitting into the puzzle of the protective network that her grandmother had built over the years. Sarah was beginning to understand the extent of the care and foresight with which her grandmother had orchestrated everything. "So what is our strategy?" Edward asked. Dr. Fernando opened his folder. "First step, tomorrow morning, I will go to the police department to file a report against Collins, Charles, and Marcia for fraud and forgery. I already have enough evidence to justify an investigation." Dr. Patricia continued. "Second step, we will file a declaratory action confirming Sarah's inheritance rights with all authentic documents and updated certificates. This will legally shield the situation." "And the third step?" Sarah asked. "The third step is psychological," Mary said with a smile that reminded Sarah of the clever grandmother from her childhood. "We will give Collins exactly what he doesn't expect." "What would that be?" "We will accept his meeting this afternoon, but on our terms. At the Tech Innovations office, with our lawyers present and with some surprises he isn't expecting." Robert frowned. "What kind of surprises?" Mary went to an old cabinet and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Sweetheart, your grandmother may be old and sick, but she still knows a thing or two about dealing with dishonest people." She pressed play. Victor Collins's voice echoed through the room. "Of course, the documents are forged, but the quality is so good that it will take months for them to find out. Until then, we will have at least 5 million guaranteed, and the old Smith will probably be dead by then." The silence in the room was complete. "Grandma, how did you get this?" "Dear, I haven't survived 70 years of life being naive. When Collins called me last week offering to represent my interests, I immediately became suspicious. I scheduled a meeting with him at a restaurant, pretended to be senile and confused, and let him hang himself with his own rope." Dr. Patricia smiled in admiration. "Mrs. Mary Smith, this recording is first-rate criminal evidence. With this, we can not only defend ourselves, but also sue Collins for attempted extortion. But, Grandma, that was dangerous. What if he had done something to you? Sarah, I had 3 security guards positioned at the restaurant, a nurse on standby, and Dr. Fernando monitoring everything from a nearby table." Mary Smith laughed. "Your grandma may be sick, but she is not defenseless." Sophie approached the group, carrying the completed puzzle. "Grandma, I finished. It was a castle just like Rapunzel's. How clever you are, my princess." Mary Smith bent down to be at the girl's level. "Sophie, can I teach you something important about puzzles?" "You can. Sometimes, when it seems like the pieces don't fit, it's because we're looking at them the wrong way. But when we find the right place for each piece, the picture becomes beautiful and makes sense." Sophie nodded seriously. "Like our family, right, Grandma?" Mary Smith looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Exactly like our family, my clever great-granddaughter." Edward's phone rang. It was Gabrielle. "Edward, I need to talk to you urgently." Collins just showed up at the company with 2 men he introduced as Charles and Marcella Smith. They are demanding access to the company files and saying they will take possession of the premises. And what are they doing? Edward stood up, agitated. "They are at the reception, causing a scene. Mrs. Thompson is calling security, but Collins is claiming he has legal rights to immediate access." Dr. Patricia grabbed her briefcase. "Perfect. They just committed trespassing and disturbing the peace. Dr. Fernando, can you go to the company now and document everything?" "I'm on my way." Mary Smith stood up with some difficulty but determination in her eyes. "Sarah, it's time for you to take your place as the legitimate heir of the Smith family. Are you ready?" Sarah looked around the room, at her brave grandma, at her daughter playing innocently, at Edward and Robert who had become more than colleagues, at the competent professionals who would fight by her side. For the first time since it all began, she felt truly prepared. "I'm ready, Grandma. Let's show Collins who he's dealing with. Then let's go." "And Sarah?" "Yes? Welcome to the real world of the Smiths. We are a family of fighters." On the other side of the city, in the lobby of Tech Innovations, Victor Collins watched the chaos he had created with a satisfied smile. But he did not know that he had completely underestimated the strength and cunning of the family he was trying to deceive. The final battle was about to begin. The lobby of Tech Innovations was in an uproar when Sarah arrived with her entire team. Victor Collins had turned the elegant reception area into a real circus, with 2 private security guards preventing employees from entering while he shouted about legitimate ownership rights to anyone who would listen. Mrs. Thompson was behind the reception desk, visibly disturbed, but maintaining the dignity that characterized her. Upon seeing Sarah approach, her eyes lit up with relief. "Sarah, my daughter!" "I'm so glad you arrived. This man is saying that the company now belongs to him and the true Smith heirs." Collins turned upon hearing Mrs. Thompson's voice, and his predatory smile widened when he saw Sarah. Beside him were a suspicious-looking man, dressed in expensive but questionable taste, and a blonde woman with excessive makeup and a red dress that looked more like a costume than business attire. "Sarah, what a joy to see you." Collins approached with open arms, as if they were old friends. "Let me introduce Charles Smith and his daughter Marcella, the legitimate heirs of the Smith fortune." Sarah observed the 2 closely. The man introducing himself as Charles had nervous eyes that avoided direct contact, and Marcella was chewing gum obnoxiously, completely out of place in that sophisticated corporate environment. "Dr. Collins," Sarah said calmly, "what a coincidence to find you here, especially considering our meeting was scheduled for 5 o'clock. "Ah, Sarah, small changes in plans. My clients were eager to see your properties." Collins gestured grandly to the lobby. "After all, technically half of this building already belongs to them." Edward stepped forward, clearly furious. Collins, you have 30 seconds to get your goons out of here before I call corporate security. Edward, always so impulsive. But now you're talking to the new owners. Collins pulled some papers from his briefcase. I have here a temporary injunction that grants us immediate access to the Smith family's assets. Dr. Patricia approached elegantly, took the papers, and quickly examined them. Interesting. This injunction was issued by Judge Henry Fields of the family court. Exactly. A respected magistrate who recognizes the legitimacy of my client's rights. Patricia smiled. Dr. Collins, Judge Henry Fields retired 2 years ago and currently lives in Portugal. This injunction is yet another forgery in your extensive collection. Collins' smile faltered for the first time. Furthermore, Dr. Fernando approached with a folder. I have here photographs of your clients getting into a rented van an hour ago. A van that is registered in the name of Charles Anderson and Marcia Anderson, their real names. Charles and Marcella exchanged nervous glances. Sarah addressed them directly. Charles and Marcia, isn't it? How much did Collins promise to pay you to represent these papers? The blonde woman stopped chewing gum. I don't know what you're talking about, dear. Of course you do, Marcia. Or would you prefer I show everyone here your photos from when you worked as a dancer at the Sensation nightclub in New Jersey? Dr. Fernando opened the folder and displayed several photographs. The woman turned red. In anger and embarrassment, Sarah exclaimed, You can't do this! It's an invasion of privacy. Actually, Dr. Patricia interjected, when you present yourself with a false identity to commit fraud, your privacy loses legal protection. Collins tried to regain control of the situation. These accusations are absurd. Your clients are criminals, Dr. Collins, and so are you. Sarah pulled out the small digital recorder that her clever grandmother had used. Do you recognize this device? When she pressed play and Collins's voice echoed through the lobby, confessing to the forgery of documents, silence fell. Company employees who had gathered to witness the spectacle were shocked, while Charles and Marcia discreetly tried to make their way to the exit. Oh, no, Dr. Fernando blocked the exit. You're not going anywhere. At that moment, 2 investigators from the police department entered the lobby, apparently following a prior complaint. Dr. Victor Collins, the taller investigator, identified himself. I'm Officer Rodriguez. You are under arrest for fraud, forgery of documents, and conspiracy. Collins' world crumbled in seconds. This is a mistake. I'm a respected attorney. I have rights. You have the right to remain silent, the officer replied while putting on the handcuffs. Anything you say can be used against you. Charles tried one last-ditch effort. Sarah, listen. We can make a deal. I'll tell you everything about who else is involved in this. Sarah approached him with an expression that mixed curiosity and disdain. Who else is involved? There are other lawyers, other false heirs, an entire network that targets wealthy families with complicated inheritances. Collins is just the tip of the iceberg. The officer became interested. Mr. Charles, if you cooperate with the investigation, this could be taken into account in your case. Sarah watched the 3 criminals being led toward the police cars parked in front of the building. Company employees spontaneously applauded, and Mrs. Thompson came out from behind the counter to hug Sarah. My dear, you were as brave as your grandmother always was. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for taking care of me all these months without me knowing. It was a pleasure, dear. Now how about we go upstairs and resolve this inheritance issue once and for all? In the president's office, now with all the authentic documentation spread across the table, Dr. Patricia was clear and objective. Sarah, with your grandmother's adoption documents, the authentic will of Anthony Smith, and now with Collins's recorded confession, your position as the sole legitimate heir is unquestionable. Robert showed an updated report. Sarah, the current assets of the Smith family are valued at $46 million. It has grown in recent months due to some investments your grandmother authorized. Sarah sat in the presidential chair, a chair that technically had always been hers by right. And now, what do I do with all of this? Edward smiled. Now you do what your grandmother always did. Use this wealth to do good, to protect the people you love, and to build a legacy you can be proud of. And the company will continue to be run by me as it always has been. But now you are officially the owner and can make strategic decisions about its future. Sarah looked out the window, watching the city stretch to the horizon. Sophie would be picked up from school by Mrs. Grace in a few hours, and they would have dinner with great-grandma for the first time in 17 years. Life had completely changed in a week. Gabrielle, Robert, Edward, Patricia, Dr. Fernando, she addressed each of them, you not only helped me recover my inheritance, you helped me find my family. Gabrielle stepped forward and held her hand. Sarah, we are your family, and we always will be. That night, at Mary Smith's apartment, 3 generations of the Smith family gathered around the dinner table. Sophie animatedly recounted her day at school. Mary listened with the radiant smile of a passionate great-grandmother, and Sarah finally felt complete. Grandma, Sarah said when Sophie went to brush her teeth, thank you for protecting our family all these years. I promise I will continue your legacy. Sarah, my dear granddaughter, you are already better than I ever was. And with Sophie by your side, our family has a bright future. Mary took Sarah's hand. There's one last thing I need to give you. She handed over a small golden key. This key opens a safe at the bank that contains my last gifts for you and Sophie. But only open it after I'm gone, okay? Grandma, don't say that. Sarah, we promised to enjoy every day we have together. But we also promised that when the time comes, you will be prepared to move forward with strength and wisdom. Sophie returned from brushing her teeth with a toothless smile. She had lost a tooth that morning. Great-grandma, can I sleep here tonight? I want to hear more stories about our family. Mary looked at Sarah, who nodded with a smile. Of course you can, my princess. We have many stories to tell. 6 months later, on a sunny April morning, Sarah Smith was at the cemetery of New York City, placing fresh flowers on her grandmother's grave. Sophie, now 8 years old and even smarter, held her hand. Mommy, is great-grandma happy in heaven? I'm sure she is, my daughter. She is proud of us. The company Tech Innovations now employed 500 people and had become a reference in corporate social responsibility. Sarah had created a foundation in her grandmother's name that offered scholarships to underprivileged youth, just as Mary had done informally throughout her life. Edward continued as CEO, but now as a cousin and trusted partner. Gabrielle had become the Director of International Relations, expanding the company to Portugal and France. Robert was now the Senior Financial Director, and Mrs. Thompson had been promoted to Human Resources Supervisor, a position she had been informally holding. Years ago, Victor Collins had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud and forgery. Charles and Mary received lighter sentences due to their cooperation with the authorities, which resulted in the arrest of 6 more people involved in the scheme that defrauded wealthy families. Mummy, when I grow up, will I take care of our family like great-grandma did? Sarah smiled, kissing her daughter's forehead. Sophie, you will do even better than she did, because you have something she didn't have, a family united from the very beginning. As they walked back to the car, Sarah reflected on how her life had completely changed. From a single mother struggling to pay the bills to the heir of a fortune, from an insecure employee to the owner of a thriving business, from a lonely person to the matriarch of a loving family. But the most important change hadn't been financial or professional. It had been discovering that she had never really been alone, that the love and protection of her grandma had always been present, even when she couldn't see them. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from Edward. Family reunion on Sunday. Gabrielle wants to cook coq au vin. Robert promised to bring Beatrice and his new girlfriend, and Mrs. Thompson made her famous chocolate truffles. Sarah smiled and replied, "We'll be there." Sophie is excited to see Aunt Bea. Beatrice, Robert's daughter, had become an older sister to Sophie, and the 2 girls loved family Sundays in the apartment Sarah had bought in Brooklyn. Not too luxurious, but spacious enough to host the entire family that had been apart for so long. As she drove back home, Sarah looked in the rearview mirror and saw Sophie sleeping in the back seat, hugging the doll she had received from her great-grandmother last Christmas they spent together. Her grandma had kept her promise. She had protected the family, preserved the legacy, and ensured that Sarah was prepared for the challenges to come. But more than that, she had taught that true wealth was not in banks or properties, but in the bonds of love and loyalty that connected people who cared for each other. Sarah Smith, legitimate heir of the Smith fortune, proud mother of Sophie, and matriarch of a family that had discovered that love is stronger than any adversity, drove home knowing that her grandma would forever be proud of the strong and wise woman she had become. The story of the Smith family would continue for many generations, built on a solid foundation of love, mutual protection, and the certainty that when people come together with noble purposes, they can overcome any challenge life presents.